Hi everyone, this is Cooking with Kurt. Today, my husband Donald and I are going to show you how to make a baked empanada de Kaliskis. This empanada has a golden brown crust that flakes off resembling fish scales, hence the term Kaliskis.
And it's stuffed with a chicken and potato filling that is absolutely delicious.
Empanada de Kaliskis is usually deep fried to get that signature flaky crust, but today we're going to show you a baked version with a puff pastry type of dough with layers of butter. To start, we're going to prep the dough. In the bowl of your stand mixer, add in 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup granulated sugar, and 2 teaspoons of salt. With a paddle attachment, mix on low-medium speed to mix the dry ingredients together. Then add 1½ cups of water and 4 tablespoons of unsalted European-style butter that's been softened. Continue to mix on low-medium speed just until the mixture is combined. Stop the mixer. Scrape down the paddle attachment and the sides of the bowl. Avoid overmixing. Then add in an additional 2½ cups of all-purpose flour and continue mixing with the paddle attachment just till the dough starts to pull away from the sides of the bowl. Stop the mixer and scrape down the paddle attachment and the sides of the bowl. Switch to a dough hook attachment and knead the dough just till it starts to look smooth. Avoid overworking the dough, as you want to minimize gluten formation and make the dough tough. Roll it into a square that's 12 inches by 12 inches. If you have a half sheet pan, you can use it to approximate a 12-inch by 12-inch square. Line the sheet pan with parchment paper. Put the dough on the parchment paper, press it down a bit and form it into an approximate square. Then continue to roll out the dough with a rolling pin so that it's flush with 2 of the corners and approximately 12 inches by 12 inches. Cover this square of dough with plastic wrap and leave it in the fridge for 3 hours for the gluten structures to relax a bit and to make the dough cold before laminating.
While we're waiting for the dough to rest in the fridge, we're going to prepare the butter block that will be folded into the dough. Take 24 tablespoons, which is 3 sticks, of cold, unsalted European-style butter and cut them in half lengthwise, so you end up with 6 pieces of butter. Take a large piece of parchment paper and lay it on a clean, flat surface. Measure out 8 inches by 8 inches on the piece of parchment paper and fold the sides of the parchment paper up so that you have sort of an 8-inch by 8-inch shaped envelope. Your piece of parchment paper should be big enough that the folded up sides cover the 8-inch by 8-inch square completely. Open up the 8-inch by 8-inch shaped envelope and place the 6 pieces of butter next to each other in the middle of the parchment paper square. Fold up the sides over the butter to enclose the butter and turn the square over. Let the butter warm up a bit so that it's malleable. When the butter has softened a bit, gently roll the butter with a rolling pin till the 6 pieces of butter start to blend into each other. Continue rolling and massaging the butter with a rolling pin till it reaches the edges of the folded parchment paper envelope, so that the butter makes a square that is 8 inches by 8 inches. Place this in the fridge till ready to use.
The next step is laminating the dough, which means folding the butter into the dough or doing turns, resulting in multiple dough, butter, layers. This is the tricky part of making puff pastry dough, but will give you plenty of tips to maximize success. After 3 hours in the fridge, take the 12-inch by 12-inch dough and the 8-inch by 8-inch butter block out of the fridge. To laminate the dough and the butter should be cool, but also soft and pliable during the lamination process. If either is too firm, let them sit at room temperature a bit to warm up. If you have a digital thermometer, the dough and the butter should ideally be between 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit when folding and rolling. Place the 8-inch by 8-inch square of butter in the middle of the dough at a 45-degree angle by inverting it onto the dough while still on the parchment paper, so that it looks like a diamond of butter inside the square of dough. The butter will be somewhat stuck to the parchment paper, so you can use the parchment paper to get the right placement. Then peel off the parchment paper. Fold the flour flaps of dough into the center over the butter, stretching the dough a bit, and pinch the dough together to seal the butter inside. Lightly flour the counter surface and with a rolling pin, roll the dough into a rectangle that's 10 inches by 20 inches. Use the rolling pin to roll it out evenly. Do your best to make it a perfect 10-inch by 20-inch rectangle with straight edges and 90-degree corners. Before folding, use a pastry brush to brush off any excess flour on the top surface, as excess flour will prevent the layers from sticking together. Fold 1/3 of the dough into the center. Pat it down so that the two layers stick together. Brush off any excess flour from the top surface of this fold, and then fold the opposite end over and onto this first fold. This is called a letter fold, as it's like folding a letter. Again, gently pat and press the dough a bit to compress the layers together, and make sure all of the edges are neat and aligned. Return it to the parchment paper lined sheet pan and cover with plastic wrap. Let it rest in the fridge for 1 to 2 hours to let it cool back down to the 55 to 60 degree Fahrenheit range. When it's within that ideal temperature range, we're ready to do another letter fold. Rolling the longer edge to 20 inches long, roll it out into a 10-inch by 20-inch rectangle again, using the same technique as before. Use a pastry brush to brush off any excess flour on the top surface, and repeat the letter fold. Like before, fold 1/3 of the dough into the center, pat it down so that the two layers stick together, brush off any excess flour from the top surface of this fold, and then fold the opposite end over and onto this first fold. Gently pat and press the dough a bit to compress the layers together, and make sure all of the edges are neat and aligned. Place the dough on a parchment paper lined sheet pan, wrap it tightly in plastic wrap, and leave it in the fridge for a minimum of 3 hours to overnight.
While we're waiting for the dough to rest and cool in the fridge, we're going to work on the chicken potato filling. Take 1.5 pounds of skinless, boneless chicken pieces. We prefer chicken thighs. Pat them dry with a paper towel. Season with 2 teaspoons of salt and half a teaspoon of ground black pepper. Take a large skillet, heat it over medium-high heat, and add in 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. When the oil is hot, add in the chicken pieces and let them cook for 3 minutes. Turn the chicken pieces and continue cooking the other side for another 3 minutes. Transfer the chicken pieces onto a clean plate to rest. In the same skillet, with the remaining fat, add in 2 large onions, minced, 4 cloves of garlic, minced, and 3 bay leaves. Sauté this until the onions and garlic are lightly browned and fragrant, about 5 minutes. Add in half a teaspoon of paprika, and continue sautéing for another 1 minute. Then add half a cup of dry white wine and half a cup of chicken stock. Deglazing the pan and scraping up any brown bits and bring it to a boil. Once the mixture is boiling, place the chicken pieces back into the skillet, along with any juices on the plate, reduce the heat to medium-low, and cover with a lid. We're going to simmer the chicken for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, turn the chicken pieces over, recover with a lid, and continue simmering for another 15 minutes. Transfer the chicken onto a clean plate. Then add in 2 medium-sized potatoes that have been peeled and cut into half-inch cubes. Turn the heat up to medium, and continue to gently simmer the potatoes in the skillet for 10 minutes, till slightly softened. Stir occasionally to prevent the potatoes from sticking to the bottom of the skillet. Then turn off the heat and let this rest. Remove the bay leaves from the thickened sauce in the skillet. When the chicken pieces are slightly cooled, chop the meat into small, bite-sized pieces, about the same size as the potato pieces. Add the chopped chicken back into the sauce with the potatoes. Mix it well, and add additional salt and pepper to taste. Let this filling mixture rest uncovered for 30 minutes to come to room temperature, then refrigerate it to cool it even more. This filling mixture should be cool so that it doesn't warm up and melt the butter layers in the dough.
When the filling has chilled and the laminated pastry dough has rested in the fridge for a minimum of 3 hours to overnight, we're ready to form the empanadas. Take 2 large sheet pans, these are 13 by 18 inches, and line them with parchment paper. Take the dough out of the fridge and divide it in half. Leave one half in the fridge while working on the other half. Again, the butter and dough should ideally be between 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit during this rolling step. Once it's in that range, flour a clean flat surface as well as the top of the dough. With the first half of dough, roll out a rectangle that's 8 inches by 16.5 inches. Try to keep the edges as straight as possible and the dough as evenly thick as possible throughout. When you have your 8-inch by 16.5-inch rectangle, cut off about 1/4 of an inch of dough from the short 8-inch sides. This will expose the butter layers so they'll be visible when the dough is rolled into cylinders. Measure and make marks that are 2 inches apart along the 16-inch side, and cut the rectangle into a total of 8 strips that are approximately 2 inches wide and 8 inches long. Cut with a knife using straight downward and lifting up cutting motions rather than sawing or dragging motions, which may lock the layers of butter and prevent seeing the definition after baking. Roll each strip to form small cylindrical logs that are 2 inches tall. You should be able to see the layers of dough and butter on the top and bottom of the cylinders. Brush off any excess flour from the surfaces of these round cylinders of dough, place them in a small parchment paper lined sheet pan, and keep them in the fridge to cool the butter back down to the 55 to 60 degree Fahrenheit temperature range. Cold is definitely our friend whenever working with a laminated dough. While those first 8 cylinders are cooling in the fridge, repeat the same steps with the second half of dough to make 8 more cylinders. Leave these in the fridge to cool once they're formed. From this point on, clean up any excess flour from your counter surface, as extra stray flour can also lock the butter layers in and prevent the definition from showing after baking. We're going to use oil rather than flour to help prevent sticking. Lightly grease your counter and rolling pin to prevent the dough from sticking to them during this final rolling process. Taking one of the circular pieces of dough at a time, use a thermometer to make sure the butter is between 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit before this final rolling step. Place it so that the dough butter layers are facing up, and flatten it with your rolling pin a bit. Then using the rolling pin, flatten the dough further into a slightly elongated circular shape, about 4 to 5 inches wide and 7 to 8 inches long. Spoon about 3 tablespoons of the cold chicken potato filling onto one side of the flattened dough, ensuring that there's at least ½ an inch from the meat till the edge of the dough. Fold the dough in half to enclose the filling, then lightly press the edges of the dough together to seal. Transfer this empanada onto one of the prepared parchment paper lined baking sheets. Use the tines of a fork to crimp the edges of the dough further. Place the formed empanadas in the fridge to keep the butter layers cool. Do the same steps with the remaining 7 pieces of dough to make 7 more empanadas, 1 cylinder of dough at a time to make sure the butter stays cool. Lightly grease your counter and rolling pin between each empanada as needed. Then do the same thing with the other 8 cylinders of dough in the fridge, forming 8 more empanadas. One tip is once the dough has been rolled out a bit, invert it to check which half of the circle has more dough butter layers visible. Then make sure that's the half of the circle that forms the top of the empanada, as to maximize the definition of layers after baking. Try to minimize touching the laminated dough with your hands because that warms up the butter. Hence, we seal with the tines of a fork rather than with our fingers. Place 8 empanadas on each sheet pan for a total of 16 empanadas. You should be able to see the definition of butter dough rings on the outside surface of the formed empanada. This is what will create a nice crunchy and flaky crust. Place the formed empanadas in the fridge each time to keep the butter layers cool. When you're ready to bake, place oven racks in the upper third and lower third positions of your oven and preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Bake your empanadas at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, one pan in the upper third rack and the other pan in the lower third rack for 12 minutes. Then swap the upper and lower baking trays and rotate them as well at this halfway mark for even baking. Then continue baking for another 11 to 13 minutes for a total baking time of 23 to 25 minutes. Or until they're golden brown. Transfer them to metal racks to cool for a bit before eating. And there it is, Baked Empanada de Kaliskis. Flaky golden brown crust filled with chicken and potatoes, exploding with flavor with every crunchy bite. Ang sarap.
Ang sarap. Yum.
So good. And that crust is so flaky and crunchy, it's impossible not to get everywhere.
And the filling is delicious, and all without deep frying, so it's healthier.
Thank you so much for watching. Please let us know in the comment section below if you're planning to make these baked empanadas de Kaliskis. Send us pictures of your creations on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, links below. And if you like this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Cooking with Kurt.
And don't forget to click on the bell so you get notified when we post new cooking videos. And for our written recipes and so much more, be sure to check out cookingwithkurt.com. Maraming salamat!